Case Studies and Models of Historical Societies. He's a lecturer at San Francisco State University. He has many recent works in both IBHA, but also in World History Association and various entropy type of or thermodynamic type of organizations. And Mark, you can add as you need to that. I know you've kind of been working with NASA at some point, and a lot of other things.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd first like to negotiate my time. I mean, the universe is like 14 billion years old. Can I have just 1% of that for my presentation?
um, I think
You're a
the
hard bargainer. 1% of 1%, just that.
Yeah, we'll grow old here.
Well, okay. In case you did approve that, I thought, well, I'll have ChatGPT create the slides, and I asked for 12 billion slides, roughly one per year, not quite. And it's thought I really only meant 12. So, and it has just one slide for pretty much the modern world. And so I said, I really want 12 billion. And it said it would take 139 days, and just gave me a bunch of lips. So let me go to my real presentation here. Let's see, hang on one second. Okay, that's a slide presentation. And you should see a title slide, and I'm going to try to put that in presenter mode. Can you see the
Very
title
good.
slide?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
I can't really see the chats on my screen, so if you have anything to chat, just tell me.
All right.
Okay, so thank you, David, for that. Kind of bio. So I grew up in the Midwest. Factories were closing all over the place. I knew politicians. I knew some politicians who had good intentions, but despite their good intentions, the factories kept on closing. People kept on losing their jobs or farms, and so I thought there's got to be a better way. And so I looked to the sciences because the sciences seem to kind of know what they're doing. And so that's kind of the thinking that kind of got me into this. I originally was a political science major. I switched to economics, and then went to law school. Worked for NASA, realized I didn't know enough science, so I went back for physics and some business and finance coursework. So I'm a bit of a mix, and so I'm coming from these different perspectives. So the big history perspective, I'm going to go through a lot pretty fast here since I can't do the 12 billion slides, but I want to make some observations for things that you probably already know. As we know, the universe began with the Big Bang. What's interesting, particularly relevant for this, is the universe kept on expanding while becoming clumpy. That meant there are hot clumps of matter, such as stars and planets, and large voids of cold space between them. That represents the thermodynamic potential. Some of you have talked about that already, but it's essentially something that life forms to consume that potential, operate upon it. And so biological life formed. I want to point out the earliest forms of life could sense things, they could react. In fact, even some simple chemical reactions can react to things. And evolution was kind of a stupid form of intelligence. You had mutations, you'd roll the dice, and finally you get a mutation that worked better. And that's great for bacteria, too expensive for people, because you have lots and millions of bacteria and die, but there's millions more. But in the old days, if you'd lose 1 million people, that would be the whole Earth's population, perhaps. So organism level intelligence emerged and evolved. Humans experienced emergence of awareness of their self and their mortality. And so at that point, and this was thousands of years ago, not tens of thousands of years ago necessarily, but there certainly is evidence thousands of years ago, that humans developed big picture models to explain everything and how mortality might be overcome, how to improve their lot, so to speak. These models have been called religion or mythology. Certainly, others of you have talked about this in much more detail than I'm going to. But the thing is, people began thinking of big pictures and began thinking, how can we overcome the problems that we foresee? So jump ahead a lot to like within the last 1,000 years. The Copernicus heliocentric model, where moving from the geocentric model, which is essentially just the Earth and a few things zipping around the Earth, to the heliocentric model where the Earth had an orbit around the sun, and then other planets went around the sun, and some of those planets were a lot farther from the sun than the Earth. So you can see the big picture models getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At the same time, and this was a really important step, the work of Isaac Newton unified earthly physics with celestial physics. Previous to that, and Galileo, in the Greek days, they had thought they were separate. But Isaac Newton indicated that there was a kind of like a uniform model of physics that applied to everything on Earth or at the ends of the galaxy and at the ends of the universe. That was big, but Edwin Hubble really expanded the big picture in time to over 14 billion years. Um, I'm sorry, actually, 14 billion years in terms of time, 47 in light years, which is a distance. Um, at the same time, actually, somewhat before, I'm mixing the dates a little bit, Auguste Comte, in emulation of physical science, they say, wow, these physical sciences have come up with all sorts of stuff. They can even model things rigorously in some cases. Want to develop the field of sociology in an attempt to identify the laws of society, such as physicists had identified the laws of physics. Um, so, so we have a big picture, billions of stars, maybe billions of galaxies, huge. So you think with a big picture like that, we won't be worried about resources because there's more resources that will be able to handle it, maybe billions and billions of years. However, some of these political philosophers and scientists began realizing that locally on Earth, because we can't really get beyond the Earth, especially in their time, critical resources were limited in supply and exhaustible. At the same time, economic laws were asserted to be constrained by physical laws and constraints. In the old days, you might be able to chant some words and some verses, and more resources might, magically or theologically appear. So while scientists haven't necessarily disproved that, they've shown that to be highly unlikely. One political philosopher was Thorstein Veblen, who, at the same time as science was advancing, we created a big industrial base, particularly in the United States, but all over the world. And you had managers to manage this. So you had the engineers creating the industrial machines and things like that, but the process became bigger than the engineers. So you had managers, but managers often have a different um, feel about things than do uh, engineers. I mean, managers are looking at, financial things and find money's kind of a fiction, but not exactly fiction. Whereas your engineers are looking at actually physical pieces of coal and burning them and getting a certain amount of energy out of them. So you can see there's a dichotomy. You certainly see this dichotomy today. Um, so this is kind of big history sort of thinking, where big history takes us all the way back to the Big Bang, which is a physical sort of a thing. We're realizing we're living in a physical world. Economic activities have a social component, but they're certainly based upon physical resources. And in particular, modern industrial activity has concentrated energy as a differentiating point. Um, in the old days, you'd go be a hunter-gatherer and gather berries and a few things like that, maybe bugs. Relatively low efficiency work, but the fossil fuels that we have today, nuclear fuel, to some degree solar fuel, really concentrates the energy. Some may be thinking of Eric Chasson's energy density. It's akin to that, certainly. And so we get to realize that also you could say that Hubble's big picture implies that human created divine right approaches of governance are arbitrary. You might have a king on earth claiming they have divine right and domination over the universe. But, when you're just talking about merry old England or something, that universe is pretty small. But when you realize the universe is 14 billion years and we're just a little tiny speck, all of a sudden our divine right monarchs don't seem all that divine compared to the rest of the universe. That motivates equitable distribution of resources. Everyone's kind of equal. So like I said, I'm going to skip a lot of time. I'm going to skip most of those 12 billion slides and jump right into the 1900s, because it's really this big picture that motivated some of the political movements of the 1900s and of the 2000s. Several movements formed to incorporate this sort of thinking. I mentioned Thorstein Veblen kind of really kicked things off with his article, Engineers and the Price System. That article was read and began to motivate people. So the idea was to govern according to scientific principles, physical science, realizing that there's only so much coal and metal in the ground, economic science, a more equitable distribution of people was required for economic and political sustainability. The thing is, if you concentrate wealth too much, it was suggested that people with spending power, they can't support the economy, and there's social issues that pop up then. And so you have to have a more equitable distribution to have a sustainable society, it was felt. One of the first manifestations of this was the Technical Alliance in 1920. This was a group of most of social scientists and physical scientists, such as Richard Tolman, the thermodynamicist, over at Columbia University. And they began surveying the resources of North America, trying to figure out how long these resources would last and how to improve industrial efficiency and governance of industry. Um, so then the Great Depression happened, and certainly some of the ideas of the Technical Alliance, um, which Howard Scott was a member of, certainly seemed to be quite valid. So Howard Scott and then M. King Hubbert, who is of peak oil fame, who's a geologist, formed this organization, Technocracy, based upon Technical Alliance ideas, and they grew to like tens of thousands of members. Um, this wasn't a particularly capitalist organization, and capitalists got very upset by this type of thing. I mean, by communism, true, but also by technocracy, and kind of intimidated the scientists who were part of this into leaving. So the technology base, mind base of technocracy decreased quite a bit, but the organization still continued. And they had the concept of energy or exergy, as some of you in Europe may call it, as a universal measuring stick for economic activity. That is, you know how much energy something takes to make, and therefore you can literally express its price in terms of how much energy it takes. And then you can figure out how much energy North American has and divide like that much energy by the population, give people energy certificates for their share of that energy, and then they would then spend that on goods that were denominated in terms of energy pricing. So that idea excited a lot of people, seemed very equitable. Everyone would have equal shares, basically. Um, However, they also had the idea that fossil fuel reserves are exhaustible. We need to be replaced by renewable energy. So they were very early proponents of comprehensive hydroelectric energy. Wind and solar weren't really known back then, but there was a lot of untapped rivers back then that they felt could provide renewable energy indefinitely. And they created some of these graphs and plots of industrial productivity. This is really back in the 30s before they had computers or calculators. They're probably doing all this with slide rules and that sort of thing. And they were some of the first people to really apply system dynamics in a quantitative way. What happened to technocracy? Technocracy became big. Unfortunately, they were clamped down pretty much. The FBI had a really thick file on them. Not because they were blowing up anything, but their ideas were, like I said, quite anti-capitalist. Um, and I was previously a member of this organization, their board. I don't endorse all their positions. Um, they began moving toward more of an abundance model than a scarcity model. As a physicist type, I need scarcity because I need my conservation equations for stuff that makes sense. Um, but they still exist. Then the ecologists actually came with their own version of this. Alfred Lotka came up with system dynamics and energetics related to ecology, but then proposed what's called a maximum power principle that essentially these ecological systems configure themselves to produce the maximum power, you can say consume the most energy. And so an organization formed based upon his approach. It was founded by Howard Odum, an ecologist at the University of, well, actually moved around, but I believe he ended up at the University of Florida. And there's a tradition of life scientists advancing the field of thermodynamics. For instance, Meyer came up with some of the initial thermodynamics looking at biological systems. And so this was the first approach to really identify and measure total energy input all the way going back. Whereas technocracy might take a pile of coal and figure out how much product you can produce for that much energy. The energy people, energy stands for embodied energy, wanted to not just take the coal, but then figure out how much sunlight went into the biological organisms to make that coal, for instance. They went all the way back, kind of fundamental principles. And they had a hierarchy of energy quality. Anyway, that's a movement that still exists. Most of their people are in Italy, US, and China. That's Howard Odom. And the types of things, this is a very simple energy network approach that they have. And then they came up with much more complicated ones. They have a database of energy use, and several environmental protection agencies are using their work, and energy people work for those agencies. This is an example of one of their networks. And since this is being recorded, you can look at it more in the recording. Another project kind of based upon these ideas was the Venus Project. It was created by an industrial designer, kind of based upon technocratic ideas, like technology ideas. But they use a lot of design thinking and beautiful concepts and graphics. They have a complex down in Venus, Florida, and they still exist. They have a certain base. None of these organizations have stayed large. They become large and then kind of settle down, but they do endure. Then in the 1990s, these resource-based economy movements formed, and they were trying to transition again from the scarcity approach to the abundance approach, where technology can create as much stuff as we want. So you don't have to worry about conserving resources because they can use technology to overcome that issue. Um, but still, they want to be environmentally sustainable at the same time. The Earth Organization of Sustainability grew out of Umeå University in Sweden. They adopted Technocracy's concepts of exergy accounting, but they were trying to push for more democratic governance of society. So you have technological governance for production, but democratic governance for other social aspects, such as social values and things like that. Here, I've created it's a biodome in Umeå where urban gardeners can grow food regardless of temperature. When I imagine it gets fairly cold in Sweden, so it would seem to be a valuable thing. So what happened? In 2000, global financial crisis hit. A new organization called Zeitgeist Movement formed. It embraced the Venus Project ideology, but they also embraced quite a few conspiracy theories, such as U.S. government World Trade Center 2001. Supposedly, they had about 500,000 members in their first year. And so they literally sucked the oxygen out of the room. EOS, for instance, Technocracy, certain other organizations lost members to Zeitgeist because Zeitgeist was the movement at the time, literally its name. But they weren't really very rigorous. Their organization has substantially collapsed. They still exist, but they're, I believe, I don't know how many members they have, but certainly isn't 500,000 anymore. Another thing also, when we're talking about things like Hubbert curves, like M. King Hubbert, we talk about peak oil, petroleum fracking has certainly postponed any global energy crisis. Yes, we're producing lots and lots of carbon, but we can keep on doing that because we have lots and lots of oil available from fracking in silver production. Okay, carbon accounting was kind of another big history sort of a thing where we're looking in terms of the whole Earth ecosystem rather than just individual humans and groups of humans. And the motivation is proof sustainability by not burning up the world, by reducing global greenhouse gas levels in the Earth's atmosphere. Arguably, human activities can impact these things. I believe they can. There's some debate on that, but I don't think it's a realistic debate. So instead of energy accounting, they're measuring in terms of mass emitted, and they created models that say that we need to reduce our emissions to a certain amount to keep the Earth sustainable. You've all heard of carbon accounting. It used to be a really big deal in the 1990s. It's still a big deal, but it's not nearly as a big deal. I think there's popular frustration with this approach. There's been resurgence of traditional religion moving away from greenhouse gas issues. Like, for instance, if the world's going to end due to religious reasons, then you really don't have to worry about global warming because the Earth's going to be transformed. Anyway, it's also cost money. I mean, some of these conservation efforts increase the cost of energy, and so that's not popular either. So it's still there. The underlying issue is still there. It certainly has received setbacks, but it's probably kicking and fighting more than the other resource-based movements. There's also singularity where we're going to turn ourselves into robots because AI is going to become as intelligent as people and then more intelligent. Ray Kurzweil wrote The Singularity is Near. There's the Foresight Institute who explains a lot of this. Pierre Diamandis then took some of these ideas from Ray Kurzweil. He's from MIT. He created something called Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. That's kind of like a geeky, techie organization, kind of big history, big picture oriented. And I think big history could do more, have more synergy with SEDS chapters and things like that. It's made up of bright college students, and their alumni are fairly well placed. Elon Musk is an alumnus. Jeff Bezos is an alumnus, for instance. Pierre Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil also created Singularity University, which was a bunch of grad students and kind of postdocs from around the world to try to solve global challenges using exponentially creating technology. So they're kind of in line with some of the thinking that we're doing, the systems dynamic thinking, the exponential thinking. And then in politics, kind of along the lines of the singularity, Andrew Yang, a technologist, ran for president in 2020. Um, and it was pretty popular as well. So it shows that there's potential for this type of thinking, even if you don't agree with the individual assertions of each of these individual people. But the general theme is that technology will create abundance. There will be haves and super haves. So there won't be poor and rich people. There will be, haves who have the basics of life, and then super haves, like, um, you know, people with their billion-dollar, trillion-dollar yachts, that sort of thing. But it's okay because there will be a universal basic income. So, no one will starve. No one will even have to work if they don't want to. So this almost is reminiscent of a brave new world where you have kind of a control economy trying to make everyone's needs very technocratic. Well, there's an elite, and then there's ordinary people kind of get by okay in that book. Okay, some of us created, we look at entropy accounting and thinking that we can not only identify, have energy account for how much things cost, but also how societies respond to changes in entropy. Like, for instance, we're trying to consume thermodynamic potential to produce entropy. Does that put an actual force on society to do certain things? Does it make it really hard to conserve things? Can we quantify that force and figure out like how much reverse force do we have to be able to conserve things? So it's like, for instance, the bridge. You have vehicles like trucks flying on a bridge, that's a downward gravitational force. Well, then if you want to keep them from falling into like the water, a river, or a bay, you can calculate how much force the bridge has to push back up against the trucks. Arguably, if the trucks falling down are the consumption of energy, and you want to make it sustainable consumption, you could then use this to calculate the force. We held a big sustainability winter institute in Florida, San Diego, and the NASA Research Park. Unfortunately, these ideas are a bit abstract, and we also need diversity. You have to have diversity these days to be really credible. So we had diversity, but then some of our members went to form a startup that got invited to Davos. Another person went back to China, work on the refugee crisis. The fact is, there's just not that much sizzle or fun in this compared to other things to do. So that movement certainly has faltered as well. Where things stand, the age of energy governance, big movements is perhaps over, maybe, maybe not. Energy shortages in the future, excessive carbon could stoke new movements. I'm not sure if excessive carbon is sufficient, even if it kills us, but it's certainly still out there. I think some existing movements have lacked intellectual rigor or critical mass. Emergy is probably the most active of these, and I think technologically legitimate. But like I said, these other organizations still exist. And Elon plans to build, like, was 1 million robots. And so he and his robots may take over, and then we'll just have to leave it to them to deal with things. And again, carbon accounting is still the paramount successor of these earlier movements, at least at this current time, at least in my opinion. Okay, I'm just going to just pop back. So contact information, and if you have any questions or comments, I welcome them. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. Very nice. Um, so maybe in California we'll be taken over by the robots first. Is that you'll let us know how it goes?
There are so many self-driving cars here. If you stick arms on them, they're probably already a takeover right now.
Wow. Have you taken one? Taken one of those cars?
Just briefly, yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about them because you never know if there's an accident or something. you know, anyway, I don't want to be on the phone for 10 hours of tech support.
Yeah. All right. Any comments or questions? So how could this be incorporated into big history?
Well, I'll talk about trying to create synergy with other organizations. And
Yeah.
I think Big History could become part of the educational program of these organizations and sorts of organizations. Um, and of I think that's one way it could be. And also, like I said, I think in the Big History community, I mean, many of you have talked about some of the challenges to society, how some of this thinking could help society. I think there could be a lot more synergy between these communities.
So
This was a kind of a connect the dots presentation to try to bring awareness to your community, and I'm going to try to bring awareness of Big History to those communities.
yes. So you're in that San Francisco area. So do you have a lot of contacts there and that are doing these type of things? I think were you involved with Singularity University one time?
Yes, I was involved from about 2011 to 2019, actually 2009 as well. So yes, I know quite a few people and they're creating their startups. Some of them have become millionaires and a few of them become billionaires. They don't really think in terms of the limits of things. And that's one of the problems. I think they have to be better educated on that. Like I said, I think they think technology and AI really is the solution to most things, or they think that technology can solve like the global warming challenge. They don't really see the social issues of this.
Yeah. Have you ever come across John Smart?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he donated a lot of the library for Singular University. So yes, I haven't talked with him lately, but ever since
Yeah,
COVID, the community's been much more broken up. It used to be much more interwoven before COVID.
yeah, on the Evo Devo discussion emails, some fascinating things, and every now and then they have book discussions, and John is definitely involved with that. I think he's in Ann Arbor, or one of the places he is, right?
There's an
Any,
organization I didn't mention called the Long Now Foundation. John may have been part of that. There was some of the really long-term thinking. Certainly, that's akin to big history thinking.
yes, good. So, any other comments or questions?
I know it's late for a lot of you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah, just an amazing presentation. Wasn't aware of any of these organizations. I read one time the first World Congress about energy was around 1920. It was actually called Power. They didn't call it energy at the time. And I thought that was interesting because it sure plays a huge role in thinking about how we live. I mean, everybody needs a lot of energy, and we're all of us very often are not aware how much we actually consume. And this idea about abundance, I find this interesting because this is always some thing that lately goes through my head. Everything in life almost, beginning with bacteria and so forth, it's always based on lack, and there's never enough energy and never enough matter to live on. And over time, the system becomes more and more abundant. And how can out of lack come abundance? And then, I mean, Dave talked today about how coal and oil had to be buried, basically. And so, yeah, it is just an astonishing thing to see. Abundance plays a role in history. And
You mind putting the conference's name in the chat, would you? And if any of you know of any related organizations to this, I'd be very interested in hearing them, or people are working on this sort of thing.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add to that if anybody knows, we're always looking for things for the newsletter emergence. So, sometimes we highlight other organizations that are somewhat close to a big history, or ones that we could collaborate with or have members in. So please keep that in mind too, that we can always write something. Yes, Mark?
I know it's not usual for the speaker to ask questions, but so you've seen some of these movements, you've heard a little bit about them, maybe some you already knew about. What do you think the gap is between where they are now, what they're thinking now, versus what would be the difference to make them really effective for society and sustainability? I mean, to make really effective.
I can only think of this political coordination of all of these things where, um, yeah, where nations have to basically agree, we have issues here we have to deal with and then follow through and not get backwards every couple of years again, no, we don't have problems and so forth. To establish something like this politically, I'm lately thinking this idea with AI, the big teacher where everybody has access to very soon will teach you basically, look, we have to do this. There are boundaries. We cannot basically continue playing with stuff with like the Gulf Stream or something. We need to figure out how to manage this together. And I guess it's really is this knowledge that needs to be established in when we talk about paradigms, that you understand this is really it. I mean, it's I like the story with the dragons before, because I read this little article about how before Newton figured out the tides, how they work. There were about 8 or 10 theories, and one in particular, the Chinese had one. They were living on a dragon, and the dragon breathes in, and then the water recedes, and then the dragon breathes out, the water comes back or something. So there were these explanations, and yet, if you arrive at the real explanation, then it should be kind of, it shouldn't be discussed anymore. And I hope, that something like AI, if it's really kind of controlled and clear about this, everybody should have access to basically these explanations that are then nailed down. You don't need to backpedal this stuff anymore. You can always, in these organizations where you then deal with this, you can bring your skepticism when you really see a problem and work on stuff. But in general, kind of this educational situation should become clear. Don't talk about flat Earth anymore. Waste your time.
I wish you were right, but until you change the mind of the people with all the dollar bills in their pockets, it's going to be real hard. Very much that it won't be until there's some sort of catastrophe that makes people afraid to continue the same way and what we can do is plant seeds, but I don't see it possible to do that much more. Sorry.
So some ideas, actually one more question. Sorry, but you're the wrong group to ask. I'm going to ask it anyway. How do we bridge the gender gap? And some of these movements have a hard time bridging the gender gap as well. There were a lot of women at the 2016 Big History Conference, at that one anyway. And at our Winter Institute, we did have several women, but then, look at the gallery.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think? Any ideas?
We have different brains, I guess, a little bit. I guess if we can present this in a way where what we're talking, if you have a picture and you show these are the causation chains, and this is what we need to do.
Until we know why they aren't coming, or the women aren't coming, it's going to be real hard to mount an effective argument.
Yeah, I always think that maybe if we, get some more of the teachers involved. I know that teachers of both gender, but at least it's somewhat more balanced than this. And the thing is, we don't have that real connection. And so, working with Bridget again, so I think she's posting something in the OER big history thing about, the follow IBHA, and see if we can get some connections going that way. But that is a very good question, and I'm not sure what the solution is. On the organizations, right? You had, what could the organizations do, and why, what would they do now? I think they were very logical, right? Technocracy and stuff. And logic doesn't seem to be, I think, as others said, logic doesn't seem to be the main driver of how our energy is done. It's more what's invested and what the money people can make. And the other thing is that there's not a whole lot of consideration too much for the future generations, right? Even though the U.S. National Environmental Protection Act really, the preamble is very beautiful of protecting future generations or whatever, and that's not there. But some young people are taking out lawsuits against companies and governments and making some progress. I don't know how much progress they can make today, but a couple of years ago they were making some progress. And that might be a way that we get more consideration of that. But yeah, my take.
Well, nevertheless, this group provides a very important nexus for this type of thinking.
All right, anything else? So I just would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants today. I think we had another great day of discussion, a lot of different topics and a lot of different considerations. Tomorrow, last day, starts at 9 o'clock Eastern. Carl, you're up. To begin with, I think a lot of you are here or have been here. There's only one that I pretty much know that might not make it. That's Tatiana. That's in the middle. So figure out. We'll see if I can contact any of the three that didn't make it today without any notification, and maybe we can get one of them to fill that gap. But we go, right now it's from 9. The conclusion's at 1400. So about 1430 Eastern time, I think we'll definitely finish in there. And if some of you did not know, Lucy will be talking last. She had a slot on Monday, could not make it, so she asked for the Wednesday. So I swapped with her on that. That's the one kind of a agenda change that we have in that one. All right. So I hope to see you tomorrow again. I think we have some excellent talks and ideas to ponder about. So I think I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Must be a huge recording by now. I don't think I've stopped it all day. So it's going to take a while to do that processing.